Nevada Territory, 1887. The evening light fell low across Hollow Creek, painting the dry fields in honey and dust. Crickets hummed somewhere beyond the fence line, and the wind carried the smell of sage and warm hay from the stables. On the edge of that quiet valley stood Rowan Hart's ranch, a lonely stretch of land people in town whispered about. Some said he was a widower. Others said he just preferred silence. What they all agreed on was that no man worked harder or spoke less. Down the dirt road, a woman approached on foot. Her name was Eleanor Ward, though few in these parts would know it. She wore a sun-faded travel dress and a bonnet that had seen too many miles. The leather of her boots was cracked from the trail, and yet she walked with steady grace, the kind of steadiness that comes from loss and endurance. When she reached the gate, she paused, her gloved hands tightening around the strap of her satchel. Children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere behind the barn. For a brief moment, it sounded like the past she thought she'd buried. The ranch door opened. Rowan Hart stepped out, tall and broad, his shirt sleeves rolled, a rifle leaning against the wall beside him. His eyes, gray as ash after rain, had studied her for a long second before he spoke. "Evening, ma'am. You lost?" Eleanor met his gaze. "No, sir. I was told there were children here and that they've no teacher." He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. "That's true enough. You one?" "I was," she said softly. "I taught at a mission school near Laramie. But I came west after—" She stopped herself. "I came west looking for work. I can teach reading, numbers, manners if needed." Rowan's eyes didn't move. "You got any of your own?" The question hit harder than a bullet. She drew a slow breath. "No, I can't have children, but I've loved plenty that weren't mine." For a moment the ranch was silent except for the wind brushing against the barn boards. Rowan's expression shifted, not pity but something deeper, quieter. He gave a small nod. "Well," he said finally, "I've got enough for both of us then." He turned and motioned her to follow. Together they crossed the yard where 4 small figures played in the dust. Ben, a serious-eyed boy around 11. Molly, graceful and watchful at 8. Sam, all energy and mischief. And baby Clara, chasing a wooden hoop that rolled crookedly through the dirt. "They're good kids," Rowan said quietly. "Just been short on steady hands." Eleanor knelt beside Clara and smiled. "Then maybe that's what I came for." By sundown, Rowan showed her a small spare room beside the kitchen. The walls smelled faintly of pine and soap. Someone had left a knitted blanket half-finished on the chair. She touched the yarn soft beneath her fingers, and felt something she hadn't in years, the fragile spark of belonging. Outside, through the open window, Rowan's voice carried softly as he called the children in for supper. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, letting the sound wash through her. Maybe this was how a new life began, not with noise or plans, but with a simple door opening at the edge of nowhere. That night, as the coyotes howled beyond the creek, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Somewhere in the dark, a child's footsteps creaked across the floorboards, slow, unsteady, and not entirely awake. She wasn't the only one haunted by ghosts. The first morning at Hollow Creek Ranch broke quiet and blue. The wind had died down overnight, leaving a stillness that almost felt like waiting. Eleanor rose early, her breath fogging in the cool air. Someone had already lit the stove. A kettle hissed softly, and beside it sat a tin cup filled with warm milk wrapped in cloth. No note, just thoughtfulness left behind. She smiled faintly. That kind of care came from habit, not words. The children crept into the kitchen one by one, Ben with his boots half-laced, Molly rubbing sleep from her eyes, Sam who came running in with mismatched socks, and little Clara dragging her doll by one arm. They stared at Eleanor as if she were some new species. "Good morning," she said brightly. "I hope you're hungry." They nodded, silent but curious. Only Sam dared ask, "You gonna stay here long, ma'am?" Eleanor poured him milk. "As long as your pa lets me," he grinned. "Then you best not burn breakfast," she laughed. And the tension in the room cracked just a little. By noon, she had set a small table near the window and cleared a patch of floor where sunlight pooled like gold. She brought out a piece of chalk and began drawing letters on a scrap of slate. Slow, deliberate strokes. Ben watched from the doorway, pretending not to. Molly eventually came closer, her curiosity stronger than her caution. Eleanor hummed softly as she worked, old tunes from her childhood, gentle, steady songs that made even the air feel calmer. "See this one?" she said, shaping an S. "It curls like a snake in the grass." Molly giggled. Sam joined in, tracing his finger through the dust, making his own crooked version of the letter. By the third day, all of them were sitting near her, spelling out names and shapes, laughter mixing with the smell of stew simmering on the stove. Rowan passed through the parlor often, silent as always. But Eleanor noticed the way his eyes softened each time he saw them bent over their slates. He never said a word, just tipped his hat slightly before heading back out to the fields. That night, she found little Clara standing by the stairs barefoot, eyes half closed, whispering something too soft to understand. "Sweetheart," Eleanor murmured, kneeling. "You're dreaming." "Let's get you back to bed," Clara didn't answer. She just hummed a low tune, the same lullaby Eleanor's mother used to sing long ago. The sound cut straight through her. Eleanor carried the child back to her cot, tucked her in, and sat beside her until the girl's breathing evened. When she finally returned to her room, the moonlight had spilled across the floorboards like silver water. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a traveler passing through. She felt needed. Before blowing out the lamp, she looked out the window. Rowan was still awake, sitting on the porch, sharpening a knife by lantern light. His shoulders were heavy, but there was something patient about the way he moved. Eleanor whispered to herself, "A man like that could build a whole life with nothing but his hands." Just before dawn, a scream shattered the quiet, sharp, frightened, and young. Eleanor's heart slammed. One of the children was hurt. The scream came from outside. Eleanor was halfway down the stairs before she was even awake enough to think. Out in the yard, the sun had barely risen, painting everything pale gold and blue. Molly lay near the corral fence, clutching her arm, tears streaking her dirt-covered cheeks. Sam was beside her, white as paper, shouting for help. Rowan was already running from the barn, boots thudding hard against the ground. "What happened?" "She fell," Sam cried. She was climbing the fence like she always does. Eleanor dropped to her knees beside the girl. "Let me see." Molly whimpered but obeyed. Her arm bent wrong just below the elbow. Eleanor's stomach twisted, but her voice stayed steady. "It's broken." Rowan crouched opposite her, his hands trembling slightly. He looked more frightened than the child. Eleanor's tone turned calm, almost commanding. "I'll need 2 straight pieces of wood, quick." Rowan snapped a fence rail apart with one brutal motion and handed her 2 narrow planks. She tore her apron into strips, setting the splint gently against Molly's arm. "This will hurt, darling, but only for a moment. You're brave, aren't you?" The girl nodded through tears. Eleanor tied the splint tight, her movements firm but tender. When she looked up again, Rowan was watching her. Not the way a man watches a woman, but the way someone sees strength they hadn't expected. "She'll be all right," Eleanor said, brushing the girl's hair back. "It'll mend clean if we keep it still." Rowan's jaw clenched. "I should have been watching her." "You can't watch every breath they take," she said softly. "What matters is you came running." They carried Molly inside, Rowan's arms careful but sure. Eleanor stayed at her bedside until the pain finally faded into sleep. She cooled the girl's forehead with a damp cloth and murmured stories from her own childhood, the kind she hadn't told in years. When she finally turned, Rowan was still in the doorway, silent, his hat in his hands. "I've seen mothers who didn't care half as much," he said quietly. "But you act like they're yours." She hesitated, then answered, "Maybe because I once had one of my own." His eyes softened. He didn't ask more. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Eleanor sat alone at the table. She opened her small wooden box and pulled out a silk ribbon, faded pink, embroidered with a single name, Clara. The name was almost gone now, the thread worn thin. Her real daughter's name. She touched it gently, but didn't cry this time. For the first time since losing her child, the ache in her chest didn't feel like a hole. It felt like a place slowly being filled. The days after were different. Rowan spoke more, though never much. The children began to look to her not as a guest, but as something steadier. When Molly could finally smile again, it was Eleanor who braided her hair and kissed her forehead. One afternoon, while washing tin plates at the pump, she glanced up to see Rowan sitting on the porch, trying to mend a torn shirt sleeve with clumsy stitches. It was Sam's shirt, green plaid, worn thin. "You're doing it wrong," she said, half smiling. He looked up, grinning faintly. "Then you best show me how." She did, her fingers brushing his, quick and sure. For a long second, neither spoke. There was warmth there now, quiet and unspoken, but growing like fire under ash. 3 days later, a stranger rode into the yard, papers in hand and trouble in his eyes. And with him came the threat that could tear everything apart. The stranger rode in just after sunrise. His horse was dark, sleek, and too clean for ranch work. The man himself wore a long coat and a badge pinned under the lapel. Not law, but authority all the same. Rowan met him halfway across the yard, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're far from town. What's your business?" The man dismounted slowly, every move precise. "Mr. Hart name's Walter Finch from the county office. I'm here on behalf of territorial welfare." Eleanor stepped onto the porch, her heart already tightening. Finch reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded set of papers. "You're caring for 4 minors. None of them, according to our records, bear your name or kinship. Is that correct?" Rowan's face didn't move. "That's right. Then by the law of the territory, these children are to be relocated to the Cheyenne Home for Foundlings within 10 days' time." Eleanor felt the air vanish from her lungs. "You can't take them," she said. "This is their home." Finch adjusted his hat. "Ma'am, I don't make the laws. I just see they're kept." Rowan didn't shout, didn't argue. He just took the paper, folded it once, and tucked it into his vest pocket as if it weighed 100 pounds. The stranger rode away in a trail of dust. The silence he left behind was heavier than thunder. That night, the children sat close together near the fire, too quiet for comfort. Sam broke it first. "That man said we ain't family." Eleanor knelt in front of him, taking his small hands in hers. "Don't you believe everything a man with papers says? Family isn't what's written, it's what's lived." But even as she said it, her throat burned. Later, she found Rowan sitting alone on the porch steps, a lantern burning low beside him. He didn't look up when she joined him. "I ain't their real father," he said finally, his voice rough. "Ben's folks were burned out in the valley fire. Molly's mother died birthing her. Sam's father ran off, never came back. And little Clara, her ma worked at the saloon in Silver Bend. She left her wrapped in a blanket by my gate." He stopped, jaw tight. "I didn't know what else to do, so I kept him." Eleanor laid her hand over his, firm and certain. "You gave them what no one else would. A place to stay, someone to care." Rowan's eyes flicked to hers. "Won't matter once that man comes back with the law. They'll take them. Not if I can help it," she said quietly. Over the next few days, Eleanor wrote letters to the pastor in town, the storekeeper, even the widow who'd once taken in Sam during a hard winter. She told them the truth. These children had found something worth keeping, and it wasn't charity. It was family. When she rode into town to deliver the letters, people listened. Some nodded. Some signed their names to statements she'd prepared by hand. Hope began to feel real again, fragile but breathing. That evening, when she returned, Rowan was waiting by the gate. His voice was low. "You went to town for them?" "For all of us," she said. He didn't answer, but she saw it in his face, that quiet shift from despair to belief. Inside, the children were asleep, curled together like pups by the fire. Eleanor watched them for a long time, then looked to Rowan. "We'll fight for them, together." He nodded once. "Together." But before that fight could begin, the storm rolled in, dark, wild, and bringing with it a night that would test them all. The storm came without warning. By dusk, thunder was crawling across the valley, and the wind howled through Hollow Creek like a wounded thing. The horses kicked and snorted in their stalls. Lanterns swung wildly in the rafters. Eleanor moved fast, checking windows, keeping the children close. Clara lay on the couch, her skin pale and burning. Fever had come hard and sudden, like lightning from a clear sky. Rowan stood in the doorway, his coat already on. "The doctor's in Carson Hollow. I can ride there and back before morning." Eleanor shook her head. "The bridge washed out last week. You'll drown before you reach the ridge." He pulled his hat low, voice steady but low. "If I don't go, she might not see sunrise." She looked down at the sick child in her arms, then back at him. "You'll freeze before you even get that far." Rowan knelt beside her, his rough hands resting gently on Clara's blanket. "You can handle the others. But this one's mine to do." Eleanor pressed her lips together, fighting tears. "Then promise me you'll come back." He managed a small smile. "You don't let go of a place like this that easy." Then he was gone, swallowed by wind and rain, his horse's hooves fading into the storm. Hours passed. Eleanor fed the fire, cooled Clara's skin, and sang soft lullabies from another lifetime. The other children stayed close, frightened but silent. When Sam finally whispered, "Is Pa coming back?" she gathered him into her arm. "If it's for one of you," she said, her voice trembling but sure, "he'd ride through the whole world." Sometime near midnight, the storm reached its peak. The windows rattled, thunder cracking close enough to shake the floorboards. And then, faint at first, came hoofbeats. Eleanor ran to the door and threw it open. Rain lashed her face. Out of the dark came two horses. Rowan slumped in the saddle, soaked to the bone, leading the second mount. Behind him sat Doc Harris, clutching his medical bag. Rowan nearly collapsed as he reached the porch. "Got him," he rasped. "And the kit." Eleanor caught his arm. "You stubborn, beautiful fool." By dawn, Clara's fever broke. Her breathing eased and color returned to her cheeks. The doctor left just after sunrise, shaking Rowan's hand before riding off through the wet fields. When the house finally went quiet, Rowan fell asleep in a chair by the hearth, boots still dripping, one arm draped over his chest. Eleanor stood for a long time just watching him, a man who had risked everything for a child not his by blood. The knock came at first light. Two men from the county stood on the porch, hats in hand. One of them spoke softly. "Mr. Hart, Miss Ward, and your petition's been reviewed. The community spoke for you loud and clear. The removal order's rescinded." Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling before she could stop them. Behind her, Ben's sleepy voice broke the silence. "We can stay?" She knelt, gathering them all close. "Yes, sweetheart. You're home." Later that week, the final letter arrived, the county's official seal pressed in wax. Rowan read it aloud, voice thick. "Legal guardianship confirmed. Rowan Hart and Eleanor Ward, joint caretakers of Hollow Creek Ranch." The children whooped. Eleanor laughed through her tears. For the first time in years, the house felt full. That evening, as the sun set over the hills, Rowan sat beside her on the porch. The air was soft and golden again, the storm just a memory. "I was never much for big words," he said, eyes on the horizon. "But if you were to stay here, Miss Ward, I reckon this place might finally feel whole." She smiled, resting her hand over his. "I already did." Their fingers stayed entwined, unsteady, certain, belonging. The sky burned with pink light as the children played in the yard, laughter echoing through the hills. Hollow Creek was no longer a lonely ranch. It was a home, built not from blood but from courage, kindness, and the quiet kind of love that never needed explaining.